We heard leading into this 19th Party Congress, this would be a time of consolidation of the power of President Xi. How did we see that in this over 3-hour-long speech?
Well, I think it really marks the beginning of a new era. I mean, if you like, Chairman Mao rescued the country, China. Deng Xiaoping rescued the Chinese economy. Now Xi Jinping has rescued the Chinese Communist Party, and that sets the stage for what really is a fantastically ambitious program. I mean, this lays out a program in theory in 2 stages, from 2020 to 2035, then from 2035 to 2050, and Xi Jinping will be at the centre of it. As your correspondent said, we don't know what's going to happen with the leadership next week, but it's very likely that Xi Jinping may stay on longer than another 5 years.
So Richard, when President Xi first came to office, there was a lot of talk about reform. We're going to reform everything. How does that reform movement fit together with the state permeating every aspect of society? Because clearly in the speech yesterday, the president really emphasized the role of the party.
Well, I think, frankly, that you and I define the word reform very differently from how they define it. In other words, we think reform means liberalisation. It means their economy will become more dominated by the private sector, less reliant on the state. That's not how they think. They want to merge the private sector with the state sector in some respects to make them self-supporting. That's their idea of reform, and with the party at the centre. They're not trying to make their economy like a Western economy, and I think that's a key point to understand when we talk about reform.
Richard, he also said, though, he wanted to transform his army into one of the world's top by 2050, the need to modernize their combat capability. What does that look like then for the region? And walk that out for me.
Well, the first thing to say is they're getting there already. We've got another aircraft carrier coming off the docks later this year or early next year. Just remember, when China is competing against the US, as it were, has to manage the whole world. China is really focused on Asia. So China, even if it hasn't caught up with the US military globally, it's already getting competitive with the US military in Asia itself. And I think what Xi Jinping is saying there is just saying, watch this space, because China is determined, I think, over time to become the dominant power in Asia. Their economy is growing. Out of economic power grows military and strategic power. And I think China is, laying down its lots of thin red lines throughout Asia, and now it's got the military to back it up.